that, so we're going to finish that up, and then we'll touch on the second topic, which was sort of dealing with animals you inherit, and whether you inherit them as a new keeper on a string, or you inherit them from another zoo. So basically, what do you do when you take over an animal? So I showed you this video the other day, didn't I? Yes. Okay. So in light of shaping, we were kind of talking a little bit before about how different ways that you can use targets to help you train and shape behaviors, and in consideration of the small steps that you might use in targeting, this illustrates some very small movements of a chimpanzee's tongue. He's learning to stick his tongue out in order to swallow pills. So the idea is he has a great big open mouth, his tongue is stuck out, which opens up his throat. You can drop the pills in and then reinforce swallowing. And we've trained this behavior with a number of different animals. I'm not sure if anybody here is currently training or has trained that behavior, but it's really helpful when you have pills or medicine that taste nasty and you can't hide it in something, so you actually reinforce swallowing. But the first thing that has to happen is getting the animal to do a great big open and stick out their tongue, or so that their throat's open. Because if their tongue, the idea is if the tongue's pulled back, you can't deposit the pills, because then they stick out their tongue and whoop, the pills come out with it. So what you'll see in the first clip is the open mouth. That you'll notice his tongue is pulled way back. Alright, so then in this step, we're using the tongue depressor as a target, not to hold his tongue down. So he's being reinforced, called like from his friends, he's being reinforced for moving his tongue just a little bit, with the idea of having to stick it out further and further. And then the straw simulates the pill popper, because, good boy, once his tongue was sticking out, somehow I thought I could just toss pills and they would go right in the back of his throat, but they were bouncing off his face, sticking on his tongue, and it was a huge disaster. So, those pill popper things that look like a syringe that you can use for cats, that was the idea, is we would use that to deposit pills in the back of his throat. And so the straw was just simulating that device. So he's reinforced for holding his mouth open, keeping his tongue on the tongue depressor while the pill popper goes in. But really tiny approximations are kind of what I want you to notice. Oh, that is wonderful. And so then the idea is, as a continuate, for this particular individual, getting this positioning was critical to the behavior, harder than getting him to swallow the pills. So I just wanted to show you that to illustrate it. But typically when I train this behavior, I use like garlic tablets or vitamin E, or you can use the empty capsules and fill them with oil or something that doesn't have a lot of flavor to it. The idea is you train the behavior with a relatively neutral tasting pill, because if you train it with something that tastes good and they bite into it, which inevitably will happen when you're first training it, then it tastes good and they want to keep chewing the pills. Or if you train it with something that tastes nasty and they bite into it, then they don't want to play your game anymore. So finding something that's relatively neutral is helpful. Okay, and I know everybody isn't training trunk washes on elephants, but the reason that I want to show you this is, again, just to describe some of the steps, some of the small approximations that are used in training a behavior. So when you're developing a shaping plan and thinking about the behavior you're going to train, I find it really helpful to look at the components of that behavior. Does it have desensitization elements? Does it have parts of the behavior that require the animal to be in a particular position or location or things like that? So identify as best you can all of those different components of the behavior. So with the trunk wash, and the way the trunk wash looks is the elephant gives you their trunk, 60 cc's of saline, sterile saline are instilled into the trunk. They lift the trunk up to wash, and this is done for TB testing. The solution washes down the trunk, they drop the trunk down, put it in a Ziploc bag or some sort of container, and it's ideal to have them forcefully exhale the fluid. That way they're bringing up goo from the lungs or as close to the lungs as possible. So that's the idea behind it. And then you can give a sputum sample. That doesn't work as well for elephants. So this is the idea behind the behavior, is that they need to take that solution, lift their trunk, let it wash all the way down, drop the trunk, and blow it back out. So those are the components. They need to have their trunk relaxed and be comfortable handling it. And for some elephants, this is a big deal and may require some desensitization. They need to lift the trunk with the saline in it, not slinging the saline out as they're raising it, and hold it there for a period of time. A really high lift of the trunk is ideal because, again, it just washes the solution down further. Keep it there and then drop it back down to the container without losing the saline again. And then they need to be desensitized possibly to having the saline and the syringe squirted up their nose. So they may need to be desensitized not only to the feeling of that, but also to the syringe and having their trunk manipulated and handled. And then again, at the end of the behavior, sticking their trunk inside a bag, which could feel weird and a little scary to them. And then of course we have to keep safety in mind where, because when you're handling the trunk and manipulating the trunk, that's potentially a pretty dangerous end of the elephant. So you want to make sure that you've got the elephant positioned for safety. So in this case, we're just starting the trunk up, and you can see she's reaching her trunk to the target to position it. Using two people, the trainer is the person in the blonde, and so the other person's just helping out by using the big long target to get the trunk curled all the way up. Pretty good one. Just quit while you're ahead. Get your small stuff. Okay, and then another component of this is, of course, to take the saline into the trunk, hold it there, and then exhale. And some of the problems that we see are the elephants might lose the saline solution, either when they're lifting their trunk or they just let it dribble right back out. Some of them want to drink it. So looking at solutions for that, we train from the back of the behavior, the end of the chain, which is the blow. Training the blow first can sometimes help you because then you can ask the elephant to blow or not to blow. And if you ask them not to blow, then you get to keep the saline in their nose a little bit longer. Sometimes we start with water. One elephant that I worked with, she really liked the taste of the saline, so we started with water and then gradually increased the salinity. And that way she got over her taste for salt water. We can also look at repositioning the elephant. So there you see the problem. Slideshow. There it goes. All right, a little bigger. position the elephant for inserting the solution into the trunk. There's a number of different ways. You've seen a couple of examples where the elephant's trunk were extended. We could also think of using a different position for the animal. So again, these aren't necessarily things that you might be doing because you're not working with elephants, but think of how, if you're encountering a problem with your shaping plan, can you manipulate the position of the animal to get them in a position where they can be more successful, have a better chance of doing what you're asking them to do. I mean, that's really the critical part there. So again, working with the bag, training the elephant to put their trunk inside the bag and blow. Some common problems: they might want to grab it, they might want to eat it, they can grab the syringe, they can miss the bag. There may be some swearing here, I'm not sure. Yeah. All right, so there's a common problem. So again, thinking about shaping as all the small steps, one of the most common mistakes that certainly newer trainers make, and I think we all sometimes fall into this problem as well, is trying to take too big of steps. You think the animal's ready to take this big leap, so I'm going to go from having your trunk all the way up to all the way down and in the bag. And that might just be too big of a step. So if you're having problems, think about, can you make smaller steps? Are there smaller approximations that you can use? In the case of the elephant, we can desensitize her to having her trunk touched, to train the behavior trunk here, so you can direct the body part, in this case the trunk, to a very specific location. And of course, think about how you use your food reinforcers, magnitude of reinforcement, and you can jackpot for appropriate small steps.
That would go better.
Forward. Okay, and then maybe in this case we want to practice without the bag altogether, because the bag tends to be a bit of a distraction if it's something the elephant wants to grab. So just get the series of movements, the trunk up, and then bringing it directly to the trainer's hand. Woo! So the idea here is there are a lot of different small approximations that you can make when you encounter a problem, particularly with a complicated, multifaceted behavior like this. Again, just reinforcing this aspect of the behavior, which is blow. Usually on the elephant, we can take their trunk and feel when they exhale, and then selectively reinforce a stronger and stronger blow. And so watch the trainer's hair right up at the top. That's a good one. It's a bag right out of your hair. And then just the completed behavior. Again, you can see the positioning is different for different elephants. But depositing the saline, asking for the trunk up. Okay, and so just kind of as I start to wrap up how we think about training new behavior, one thing I want to, I guess, ask you to think about is when animals offer things, maybe they're being creative or innovative, they're having fun with the training. I mean, training should be fun. Of course, we have our tier behaviors that we're always focused on and trying to get our tiers checked off, but sometimes animals just want to have fun. and they might invent some really interesting behaviors, which was the case with this elephant, as I'm sure you've experienced with a lot of other animals. She's trained to do a lateral recumbency, a down, as well as a sternal recumbency. She was the first elephant fully trained in protected contact too, first baby. And then she started creating and inventing all of these new behaviors. She was crawling, she was belly crawling. And she seemed to be having a lot of fun inventing these new behaviors. So we took the opportunity and just let her invent new behaviors.
Can I ask, Margaret, did you have a cue for like, show me something new?
It actually, I don't know if you noticed, like the trainer's doing this, so that was her down cue. And then during the down, she started inventing all of these things. So we could still get her to do a down with the cue, but then when you would say, do something, she would kind of just invent things.
Kind of did end up with a do something
Yeah,
cue that
yeah.
go ahead and do whatever
Yeah.
dream you want to do.
Yeah, and you get reinforced for doing something new and fun and different. Yeah. So again, you know, when you've got an animal that's super smart and is learning a lot of behaviors, and maybe you want to take a break from the medical behaviors and hard behaviors, and you see them, or you think that they might offer these fun behaviors. They don't have to be fun, silly behaviors like that, but something that engages the animal. That's only going to strengthen your training, your relationship with the animal, your ability to use positive reinforcement, and mostly engage them and make them want to participate and work with you. So it can be a really, I think a really helpful tool, but I think it's probably more for the animals that are a little bit advanced in their training, not the ones that are just starting off, because you wouldn't want to accidentally confuse them. So kind of in conclusion, and talking about methods to train new behaviors, you know, you're most likely going to be using combinations of shaping and training. We talk about them as if they're absolutely separate things that exist in a vacuum of their own, but they really don't. You're using elements of both throughout your shaping plan. So I think it's important to recognize that. You're going to be opportunistic. If you see something happen, don't be afraid to capture it. But like we talked about on Tuesday, think about the drawbacks and perhaps the limitations of capturing behavior and how you can fill in those gaps with shaping. So capturing just, I mean, I would say it kind of supports your shaping. You're going to capture when you can, but you're still much more reliant on that shaping plan and the process of shaping to get new behaviors. And don't forget to use tools like targets to help set the animal up for success, get them in the position you need them to be in, whatever it might be. This is this sweet little monkey. He's this 28-year-old, well now he's 30-year-old macaque, and he lived in a pet store for 28 years of his life. And basically he was in a glass box in a pet store, and then he would have to go into a dark plywood box that had a hole in the top, and his food would be dropped through the dark hole, or through the hole in the top of the dark box. So he actually, when he came to the sanctuary, he didn't know how to find food. He didn't know how to look for food other than like smelling for it. He didn't like people very much, and as you can imagine, living a life like that for 28 years, guess what? Diabetic. No surprise there, because he had a crap diet. So we started, he's actually now, I'm super happy to say, received over a week's worth of his insulin injections. Yay, Team Eugene. But this is him in the early stages of training. So we decided to give him the injection in his shoulder because he didn't really like to be touched. He had no training history at all, and this was a serious medical condition. So all the foundation stuff that I talk about went right out the window in this case because we needed to get the insulin injection into him as quickly as possible. So a couple of things to point out. You can see my mouse. So those green dowels that you see, there's actually a clear acrylic panel. And so we're not squeezing him up, but what we did was just set that progressively narrower and narrower, and he actually didn't give two hoots about it. It was quite amazing. He walked right in. So it was kind of his chute area that put him, you know, with his shoulder, his side to us. that way we didn't have to actually teach him to bring his side in, because again, we were trying to fast track things. So what you'll see is we're actually going to reinforce him for moving his shoulder closer. And this was done at first by having him station his hand or put his hand on that dowel in the front. And that gave him a really good solid place that, oh, he would always put his hand there. We didn't use targets. We captured the initial movements and then shaped him to be closer and closer to the mesh. And you get to hear the lovely French accent. The other thing that he was originally doing was taking the food with his right hand, so we switched it to his left hand so that he would stay in that shoulder position. Like I said, now he's received a week's worth of insulin injections. Super proud of him and the people that trained him. Anyway, so somebody laugh. In summary, you may use modeling, which is when you take the animal and show them how to do something, like open your wine bottle. This is a civet. He's at the night safari in Singapore, and they get a lot of animals that are hit, like their moms are hit on the road or something. So he came in as an orphaned kiddo, and for those of you who know Gail, my partner in Active Environments, Gail had him to hand raise, and well, it was late one night and we were doing some work, and we went and took him out of his cage so he could have some playtime, and he helped us. So you might capture, remember that's reinforcing when the animal does it on their own. Or you might use small steps working towards your final goal. First you have to smell the wine, see where the cork is, and then you can take it out.
Looks really excited about that part.
Oh. I know, he's real cute. His name's Mackie. And he's starting to act like a civet other than this. Okay, so that's kind of all I have for the shaping and capturing part. Does anyone have any questions before we move into the next segment?